Welcome back to the EchoCast, a podcast about video game news, speculation, reviews, and whatever else I feel like covering. I'm your host, Bon, and this week we'll be talking about the game showcases coming up, the RTX 4060 cards being announced, Diablo 4 server slam thoughts, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. If you're watching live on Twitch, please leave any questions you want me to answer or topics you want me to cover. And if you want to support the podcast, you can ask via a subscription, bits, or tip message. A big thank you to supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Caged Nephilim, who's in chat right now, and Neuronix, as well as producer level patron Hassan. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Gaming news. This week we have 8 topics. The first 3 are all showcase and mostly showcase predictions. We are getting into that time of the year. We have all kinds of gaming things coming up, all kinds of gaming things to get excited about. And namely, I am going to chat about the Summer Game Fest, the Ubisoft Forward, and the PlayStation Showcase. Now, the PlayStation Showcase is coming up just next week. The week you'll be listening to this, that will be happening. I believe it's on Wednesday afternoon where I live. That may depend on where you are. First, let's talk about the Summer Game Fest, though. So this one is probably the biggest wild card. There's a few games that we just assume will be there. We assume Kojima will show something there. We assume there may be a light presence by Xbox and PlayStation. The problem is that they both have kind of their own shows that are going on. I just realized as I looked at this list, I actually did not include the Xbox Showcase, which we'll talk about that as well. The Summer Game Fest should be interesting, though. I looked up a list of things that could be there, and nothing seems like it's going to be that crazy because Xbox and PlayStation have their own shows. They're probably going to hold the best thing for themselves, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. And Nintendo could show something because they aren't expected to have a big showcase for themselves. They're also pretty notorious for wanting to show their own stuff. So we'll see. As for the Summer Game Fest, it is expected that Capcom will show off Street Fighter 6. That's coming out really soon, and it's got a lot of hype. They're doing a bunch of betas and tests. People are getting out there and playing it, including, I believe, the weekend I'm recording this. They have an open beta. There are rumors of a Dead Rising remake. That's the old kind of goofy brawler zombie game that you may remember from, I believe it was an Xbox exclusive. We have Disney, that it is expected that they may show off the Captain America Black Panther game. So I'll be interested to see if we get more of that. That is the Amy Hennig project. A lady who has, she was really well known for, I believe, Uncharted. She was one of the head people on that. And then she was supposed to have that really cool Star Wars game that EA showed off and then canceled, and it disappeared. I think it was like Star Wars 1313 or something like that, was at least the code name. We have Square Enix. It's pretty good to assume they're going to show off Final Fantasy 16 in some capacity. It is likely that they may save a lot of that for PlayStation, but I bet we see it here too. PlayStation will be more willing to show stuff at the Summer Game Fest because they're having their own show first, where Xbox is having their show after the Summer Game Fest. So I suspect that's going to be much tighter to their chest. It is rumored that Square Enix could also show off Kingdom Hearts 4 for all of you freaks and weirdos who are into that. Sega is likely going to show Sonic Frontiers DLC, the Sonic game that was panned pretty hard before it came out, and then reviews basically said it was like fine. There is thoughts or rumors of a Yakuza spinoff being shown, as well as a Jet Set Radio and Crazy Taxi remake potential. Ubisoft is going to have their own show. We're going to talk about it. Their show will also, I believe, be after the Summer Game Fest showcase, so they may be a bit tight as well. We have seen a list of the games that they have coming out. I'll be talking about that. So we'll have to kind of see what they're willing to show with this. I suspect it's going to be kind of like Xbox, where it maybe teases more than it is actual new and interesting stuff. EA is a really interesting one in theory. They have a lot of stuff coming up that they could show, but we have reason to believe they may not. This Immortals of Aveum game is getting a lot of talk about being kind of like a Magic PvP game, I believe. EA Sports FC, it's going to be them debuting their first soccer game that does not include the FIFA branding because they have cut off that deal. It seems like they've gotten all of the licenses for all of the big teams around the world. So it kind of seems like that FIFA brand being on their game may have been dragging them down because they were paying, I believe it was literally a deal in the billions to license the FIFA name. So, and if you don't know, FIFA, I believe, is trying to make their own game, and it will be really interesting to see how that goes because the expectation is they won't be using a EA level studio to do it. It's going to be probably bad. We'll have to wait and see. Skate could definitely get a feature. That game's been in pretty heavy testing, lots of betas and stuff like that. They haven't really been shy about that game in its development stages. So I bet we'll see something about that because that game is probably coming sooner than later. And unfortunately, we're probably getting no BioWare. And a couple of recent podcasts by Jeff Grubb, a guy who tends to be pretty on top of it with EA and especially BioWare, he basically said that there was no expectation to see Dreadwolf at this show because, we're now hearing that game probably isn't coming until summer of 2024. And so it's more likely we would see it in summer showcases then. EA could, in theory, do their own show next year. That also means we probably won't see anything from Mass Effect. That would be super cool, but I have a pretty good feeling that at this point we're probably waiting until N7 Day to get our big info dump on that. So sorry to everyone who I've been kind of stringing along. We've all been huffing the hopium that maybe we'll get something there. My expectations are basically zero at this point on that. And then finally, we have Warner Brothers. It seems pretty obvious they're going to show off Mortal Kombat 1. We have received a trailer this last week about that. The trailer is great. And what's really funny about it is the first half of the trailer is like very serious, setting the stage for this kind of realistic story, this kind of grounded thing. And then the second half of the trailer is literally the most graphic gore I've ever seen in a cinematic for anything, even movies. It is grotesque and it is amazing. My issue with games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and Tekken, fighting games are having like a big year this year. We'll probably see Tekken in the show as well. And I am just not good at those games. I've never taken the time to learn. I just mash buttons like a child. And so it's like one of those things, like I purchased, I believe, the last Mortal Kombat. I might end up buying Street Fighter, but I'll probably not have the patience to play it right. Therefore, I'll end up not having a good experience. Therefore, I'll probably end up not hardly playing it. But that's fine. We'll see. The Summer Game Fest is next week, or it's I believe it's in 2 weeks, I believe. I will still be here when that show happens. No, it's in 3 weeks. That's right, because it's right before I'll be out of town for a while. I will still be here for it. I will live stream it. So if you want to come to my Twitch channel, it's twitch.tv/BonDiesel. We can watch that together and see what it's all about. Ubisoft Forward prediction. So this one is a little less mysterious. This week we got an expectation of the games they expect to release before the end of their fiscal year, which will end next March in 2024. We should be seeing Assassin's Creed Mirage and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is probably their two big games. I think that's where we're gonna see, their big pops. I'm really excited about both of those games. Mirage is supposed to be a return to like old school Assassin's Creed. More recent rumors have suggested it will be more like Assassin's Creed Origins, which would be more like old Assassin's Creed, but not entirely. I believe that is where they started to introduce some of the looter type of gameplay and equipment collection and stuff like that. But I really, really liked Origins, mostly because of the characters more so than the actual gameplay. But I'm willing to accept a different style of Assassin's Creed, especially as we know, and this also came out this week, that Ubisoft is expecting to raise the number of people working on Assassin's Creed properties to almost 3,000 devs, which is up from a current number that's around 2,000. Now, they are supposed to be working on, I believe it's like 4 or 5 or 6 projects at one time. So if you think about those numbers, it kind of makes sense. It seems like they're going down the route of they have like a mobile game coming. They have Mirage, which is supposed to be more of like a realistic game. And then they have another game that's supposed to be kind of like a Valhalla and Odyssey that will be the more like big open world RPG, looter cutter, I don't know what you would call it, type of game. So, and then we have Avatar. We haven't seen much of it. There were some screenshots that released or that were leaked recently that showed some of the first person gameplay. We'll just have to see how that plays out. They just haven't shown much of this. I expect it to be a visual feast. It is on I've heard, a very upgraded version of the Snowdrop engine, which the Division 1 and 2 are both on, as well as a bunch of other games, but those being the most notable probably. And Massive is a really talented studio. Ubisoft catches a lot of crap pretty reasonably for having a lot of cookie cutter games and stuff like that. I really think that Massive kind of stands out if you look at their history, and even if you look at Division 1 and 2, the Division 1 and 2 has like a different level of, in my opinion, like polish or finish or whatever than the Far Cry and Ghost Recon and some of these other games. Those games seem like they've all kind of lumped into each other, where Massive seems like they're kind of still trying to do their own thing. We'll have to wait and see. We're also expecting to see Rainbow Six Mobile, if you're into mobile games, Division Resurgence, again, if you're into mobile games, Skull and Bones, just morbid curiosity at this point with that game. I couldn't be bothered to actually care about it. I don't think I can say anything more about that right now, though. I'll have thoughts about Skull and Bones once I'm allowed to. The Crew Motorfest, I am amazed. I didn't know that the Crew had fans. And they put out a ton of DLC and stuff for that last game, and they're putting out another game. Now this looks like it's going to be 100% a trend chasing game, trying to do what Horizon 5 did multiple years ago, which is just kind of pathetic at this point. Like, I understand that, from concept to release, these games take a long time, but with a thing like this, like the Crew Motorfest, it literally is just like, a few years ago, and I guess probably like they just saw Horizon 5 and was like, we'll do that, but worse. Like, so I don't know, all the power to them. I've tried to get into the Crew. I think it was the Crew 2. I played a little bit, and it was just one of the worst feeling games I've ever played. That's not great for that's not great for a racing game. You want your racing game to feel good, and it doesn't, at least in my opinion. We have X Defiant coming. I've talked at length about that. I think that game is aggressively mediocre, but it's got some hardcore stands, and the people who are really into it seem to be like, like angry Call of Duty fans who don't like some stuff that Call of Duty is doing in modern games. So they like XDefiant because it's doing some stuff different. And I mean, that's cool. If those people find a home, then genuinely I'm happy for them. But it is not a very good game, at least in my opinion. It just feels really generic. It feels like someone took a mobile game and turned it into a quote unquote AAA game. And yeah, I don't know. The final thing is supposed to be another large game, is what's rumored. It could be a few things. I think it could be the Division Heartland. That's a game I have to be very careful what I say about, but I think that could be it. But I really actually believe there's a really good chance this is the Star Wars game. Now, we know we have the big Star Wars Fest every year, so it's more likely that any like huge showcase of the massive Star Wars game, which is one of the studios of Ubisoft's, would more than likely have its like big reveal at the Star Wars show, much like Jedi Survivor did last year. But it's possible they could at least tease it, and I think that's fairly likely. So that's what I'm kind of expecting for Ubisoft. I would be surprised. It is weird that there's a bunch of games we're not seeing or hearing rumors about. Beyond Good and Evil 2, the Prince of Persia remake, which I swear they showed that like 3 or 4 years ago now. It had to have been, and it looked real bad, and it sounds like that game's in a rough spot. So it is interesting, and we'll be talking about this more in the future. There's talk about how like Xbox's Fable game is in trouble, is having development trouble. It's worth remembering that at one point the story about Tears of the Kingdom, the new Nintendo Zelda game, was having like a really rough time. That's part of why they delayed it, and it's come out, and to a lot of people is the best game ever made. Big ambitious games have trouble. So, do I think that this Prince of Persia remake is going to come out and be the best game ever made? I mean, probably not, but I wouldn't write it off completely. But they do have a lot of projects coming up that I'm curious. They've canceled a lot of games too, and so I'm really curious to what that will play out as. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that all those games they canceled, all those devs are what's going to make up those 800 devs that are going to start working on Assassin's Creed. But we'll have to wait and see what we get from them. I'm going to throw in the Xbox showcase. This one's really interesting because, there's things that we are expecting to see. We know we're going to see Starfield. They're even doing their own, its own showcase after the Xbox showcase. I think we'll see things like Forza Motorsport, because that should be coming out pretty soon. I really hope we'll see Hellblade Senua's. I think it's going to be, the first one was Senua's something. I keep wanting to say Requiem because of A Plague Tale, but I think it's Senua's Saga is the sequel. We'll say Hellblade 2. I think they're going to show that, and I really believe there's a decent chance they show that and it has a release date this year. I think that may be their big pop at the end of the year. If not, I would expect it in early 2024. I think we're gonna maybe see some teases from what like the Coalition is doing with there's been rumors that they're working on Gear 6. Supposedly they were working on some other projects, and after some of the issues Xbox has had in the last couple of years, Xbox said, nope, you guys need to work on Gear 6, and that is going to be our next game. That should be exciting for people, even if they're not Gears fans. The Coalition has for a long time been extremely close to Epic, who makes the Unreal Engine, and it's very likely that this Gears of War 6 is going to be an absolute just like showcase for the Unreal Engine 5. And so I'm really excited to see what they can do with that, when the whole idea is that it's made for one console. They can really optimize it for this one experience. I'm excited to see what they're going to do with that. So even a Gears 6 teaser, I'll never forget that the Gears 5 teaser is still one of my favorite reveals ever. And that was was that 2017 or 16? It was really, really cool. So, and we'll just have to see if we're going to see anything from like Fable. I suspect we'll maybe get a teaser. We have like the Outer Worlds 2, State of Decay 3. That's one I really hope we see something from. Believe it or not, State of Decay 2 is still receiving updates. They, I think just this last week or two, received another pretty substantial content update. That game is interesting, and that studio is interesting. It's Undead Labs. Unfortunately, came upon some controversy in the last couple of years where there was some talk of kind of like toxic work culture and stuff like that. But that State of Decay 2, whether you like it or not, is, I would argue, it's been one of the best supported games in the last 5 or 10 years. And it's really a bummer every year that you see this like best ongoing game awards, and they're always going to No Man's Sky and Fortnite, and you never even see State of Decay 2 get a nod because it's not that popular. But it's like the updates they do on that game are crazy. Like, that game has drastically changed in the last couple of years, and they just keep adding more, which, like, they're working on State of Decay 3. So you would assume the bulk of their work is there. And so I would guess they're doing all these big updates on State of Decay 2 with a fairly small team. And it's really impressive. And you would assume all the lessons they're learning from 2, they're going to move to 3. I'm expecting 3 to be like a more cinematic game. State of Decay and State of Decay 2 are like, there is story to them and you can suss it out if you want, but they're very much meant to be like kind of like choose your own path, like little city builder type of things where the goal is to escape and then start a new community. And so I'll be curious. I really hope they show that, but there's a whole bunch of games I hope we see. I've seen a lot of discussion, and I think it's worth talking about, at least just briefly, in that there's so much hype about Starfield, and it's like toxic hype. It's so weird because there's so much talk about like, well, Starfield better be an 11 out of 10 to save Xbox. And it's like, and I saw a good tweet today from, I believe his name is Miles Dompierre, who's I think at Windows Central, I believe, who was talking about like, Xbox needs to have multiple good games. Xbox really needs like 4 8 to 9 out of 10s. Then it needs Starfield to be an 11. Like, Starfield can be an 8. That's fine. But they really need Hellblade to be a 9, and then Forza Motorsport to be like a 9, and then Fable or Avowed or any of these other games to be like, like 8s and 9s, rather than be, one game be a 10. One game is not going to make or break Xbox at this point, but they need to put together a string of wins. And unfortunately, in the pundit world, that's not going to be the conversation. It's all about Starfield, and I really hope that they have used this extra time to make it a game that will be worthy of all of this excitement. And then finally, we have the PlayStation Showcase that is coming up really soon. It's coming up this coming week, and the big expectations there are Final Fantasy 16, probably a pretty big showcase. Spider-Man 2 is expected to be shown. That Insomniac is also doing the Wolverine game that's expected to be mature rated and is expected to be like gory and all of that. If you remember a game called, I think it was called Wolverine, it was Origins, back in the, PS3 days, I think, 360 PS3. And it was this like ultra gory. It wasn't really that good of a game, but they finally let us like be Wolverine. And so I'm expecting an equally gory experience, but because it's Insomniac, it'll be like a really high quality cinematic game as well. So, there is a chance they may tease that Wolverine game again. They've done it before. Ghost of Tsushima 2 is pretty likely. Death Stranding, it's really interesting. Like, we'll have to see if Sony can pull enough strings to get like a big Death Stranding 2 showcase. I'm kind of curious if they will end up putting most of that into the Summer Game Fest, just because Jeff Keighley and Kojima are just so close. So we'll have to see how much of Death Stranding we see next week as opposed to the couple weeks after. There's a lot of rumors about Konami having a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake that will be likely exclusive to the PlayStation. That would be a pretty big deal if they if they're going to put that onto, this much upgraded engine that, Metal Gear Solid 5 was on, I believe Konami actually owns that engine, and old Kojima wasn't able to take it with him. If you don't know, I believe Death Stranding was actually built on, I think it's the Decima engine, which is what Horizon Zero Dawn was made on. And and supposedly they are expected to show at least something from the next Final Fantasy VII remake chapter. It's an interesting one because with all of this talk about Xbox and how it's had its struggles and its lack of content and stuff like that, after Ragnarok came out for PlayStation, there was kind of like people were kind of looking around being like, oh, hey, like what's next? Like we know Spider-Man 2 is coming out and that's going to be a big deal. And we know there's these other sequels that will be big deals when it comes to Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima and stuff like that. But like what kind of like original stuff are we going to hear about? All of these live service titles they're supposedly working on? Are they going to incorporate Destiny into this showcase? Are we going to see something from this supposed like survival kind of multiplayer Last of Us game? Are we gonna see them announce Last of Us 3, anything God of War? Are they gonna bring back Uncharted? A big one I would be curious about is if they're going to even just tease the return of some big first-person shooter or third-person shooter, a SOCOM, a MAG, perhaps, a Killzone. With them having so much anxiety about that Activision deal with Xbox, a big part of that being that they don't really have their own, if you really think about PlayStation, they're fairly niche. They really survive on third person action adventure single player games. That's why they go out and get a Destiny. That's why they talk about doing all these live service games. They obviously realize that the writing might be on the wall for Call of Duty one day, and so they need to have some more diversity maybe in their like big hitter AAA titles. I know they have games like Dreams and Astro and stuff like that, but they all of their big hitters are kind of in the same genre, and that obviously works for them. They're making money hand over fist, but it's they probably want to have a little more variety. So I'll be really curious to see what they may surprise us with there. I expect that show next week to be a big deal. I think it's gonna be huge, so I'll be excited to talk about it then. Okay, well, we're gonna go to story number 4. This is the weekly topic. It may be a fairly short one, but I wanted to ask just the question of, are game console generations over? What this comes from is a lot of conversation happening recently about the next Nintendo console, whether or not it's going to be like an upgraded Switch, whether it's going to be like a Switch 2, or if they're going to get real weird and move to an entirely different concept. I've seen a lot of chatter about how, so many pundits and stuff like that are so like, just make a Switch 2, just make a Switch that's way more powerful. But if you look at Nintendo's history, they haven't really been ones to iterate. They really, really like to be dramatic. With the exception, if you look at like the Game Boys and stuff, like they did have a habit of having like, multiple versions of similarly powered and stuff consoles. But if you think about like they went from, was it the 64 to the GameCube, I think? Unless I'm missing something that was in between. And then from the GameCube to the Wii, which was like a completely new concept. That's when they really kind of gave up the whole idea of like, we're not going to try to compete on graphics. We're just going to do our own thing. And they did the motion controls and all of that. And then they did the Wii U, which was like kind of an evolution of the Wii, but not really, mostly in name. And then the Switch really was like kind of like a refinement of the Wii U, but it was bigger than that. The Wii U is a huge disaster for Nintendo, for a company that doesn't really have that many disasters. And so we have all this conversation about the Switch. Are they going to go big with their changes, or is it just going to be iterative? We have all these rumors about a slim PlayStation 5 that may have better ray tracing tech, which kind of doesn't make sense because so few games take advantage of that anyways. You would think that it would just be a little more powerful. much like the PS4 Pro. Or it could just be a slim, and that's actually what I'm expecting. I don't think that we've even really seen a situation where that justifies having like big new powerful systems yet. I think it's way more likely that they found a way to make the PS5 way cheaper and way smaller and not be the monstrosity it is now. And I think we will eventually see that. Same with the Xbox. There's all these rumors about them doing a mid-gen refresh. But what I think is a really interesting thing to look at, there was actually a story that came out today about Jim Ryan. It was Jim Ryan. He's the head of PlayStation, and he was basically saying that no, they are not going to release first-party PlayStation games on PC day one anytime soon, if ever. And you have to realize that's a strategy. Now, when you look at like Xbox, they do the day one thing. They do, we release on Xbox and PC the same day, and that's what they do. And you can have conversations about whether or not that's good, because those devs have to try to make the game work well on PC and on console. And we've seen issues with like Redfall. Now, its performance was the least of Redfall's issues, but it was definitely one of the issues. So, is there a possibility that if Redfall wasn't expected to be on PC day one, could they have spent that development time that they used for PC to make the game in general better? And it would have been better if it just released on Xbox first. Maybe, but that kind of seems like the philosophy that Sony has. And what's interesting about that to me, and the reason this whole conversation wraps back into the whole game generations thing, or the console generations conversation, is Sony really wants that big pop with selling hardware. They want all these headlines that they're getting, selling 30, 40, 50 million consoles, up to, I believe the PS4 is up over 100 million. They like that. That is good for them. And then we have to look at whether or not, are we going to have a PS6? I think we absolutely will have a PS6, because, as they said at the beginning of this generation, they believe in generations. Now, they kind of went back on that by having, I think, all of their games so far be on both generations of consoles, the last and current. But that's ending. They're going to start putting out games only on the current gen. But I really believe, especially with PlayStation, it's going to lead up to a PS6 in 4 or 5 years, where I don't think that's going to happen with Xbox. I think with the way you see them pushing backwards compatibility, the way you see them even, this generation coming out the gate with two consoles, with a lower powered one and a more powerful one, that's basically, on par with the PS5. I would be surprised if we see Xbox try to put out a big new console the same time as the PS6. I think it's more likely that before then, we will get what will look like a mid-gen refresh of the Xbox. But I really believe Xbox could go the way of like, hey, we really aren't going to have like a next generation. Instead, we're just going to put out a more powerful console every 4 or 5 years. And we'll be backwards compatible as far as we can with these games as they get more powerful with the new consoles. We will eventually have to phase out the old stuff. So say like a new console comes out in 2 or 3 years. That would make that the top dog, the X the kind of lower system, and then they may phase out the S. Now with the S, because of all of the tech they have, they can make it a streaming box, and you could still play the new games, but you'd have to stream them instead of playing them on hardware, because the hardware wouldn't be fast enough, right? And I really think we could see Xbox go a different direction of, every 4 or 5 years having a more powerful console come out, rather than try to do this rat race with PlayStation, because they lose. Even Phil Spencer said it in that interview, a few weeks back with Kind of Funny. Like, they are probably never going to be able to catch, unless Sony just like stops making consoles, or unless they change their strategy significantly. The idea, even the comparisons of PlayStation and Xbox hardware sales is kind of pointless, because Sony's just going to double them up. And so I wonder if that kind of stuff may lead to, Sony kind of doing its own thing, doing the old school generational hardware release, which is working. Why, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And I think you may see Xbox go a different direction, realizing like, oh, okay, we can't compete with that at this point. We're going to take a different, and they do seem like they're taking a different direction. They are trying to make a bunch of different variety of games. They're acquiring all these studios. They're really focusing on Game Pass. They're even kind of focusing on streaming and stuff like that. And then you have Nintendo doing their own thing. So I'm really curious. I think the days of like the PS3, or was it, what was the equivalent of the GameCube? I think the PS2 and the Xbox, like the days of having like the GameCube, the PS2 and the Xbox all coming out within a few months of each other and being these like competitive things, all in the market at the same time. And let's see who wins. I think that's coming to an end, and I think it's already over. So we'll see. Story number 5, NVIDIA has revealed its RTX 4060 lineup. This is a really interesting one. The thing to know is that, so the way that they do their hardware, so this is graphics cards. They have a 4090, it's their super top dog, it's super expensive. Then they have a 4080, and I believe a 4080 Ti. And then they have a 4070, and I think a 4070 Ti. And what's interesting about those is I believe they come in, I think it's 12 and 16 gig versions between the 4070s. And now we have this 4060. And what's so interesting about it is that I believe was it like a 4050, a 4060, and a 4060 Ti. And the two lower ones are going to have 8 gigs of RAM in them. Just know that this has been standard for like 7 or 8, 9, 10 years. And it's outdated at this point. Even the PS5 and Series X have more RAM and more memory in them, the processing memory than that. And they're also going to release this 4060 Ti for $499 that's going to have 16 gigs of this RAM in it, which is going to arguably probably make it more powerful than one of the 4070s that's $200 or $300 more. And it's a really weird tactic, because you would think they would do like a 12 gigabyte 4060 Ti and then do a 16 gigabyte 4070. And then that would be like a natural progression. But for whatever reason, they're doing that. And honestly, I've been thinking about doing some upgrades lately. I have a 3060 Ti with 8 gigs of RAM. That 4060 Ti with 16 is probably my next big upgrade. I was going to do my monitors, but they're fine. I don't need to upgrade those. And I'm fairly confident at this point. I'm actually going to go for the GPU. And it's going to be cheaper, actually, to upgrade that instead of the two monitors. Now, knowing my luck, I'm going to get that GPU installed, and then both monitors are going to die or something. But we'll see what happens. Story number 6, BioWare has released some new Mass Effect merch, and it is very Tali based. They released a picture frame that has the actual face of Tali in it. You see this if you romance Tali in the third game. In the original trilogy, it was a really badly photoshopped like stock image that they decided to represent all of the Quarians with. In the Legendary Edition, they made it a like rendered model of what I assume now should be considered the canon look for not only Tali, but probably Quarians in general. This caused, and it still has, a lot of conversation around it. There's a lot of people that don't like that she looks too human, that she's not alien enough, that they wanted her to be one of these, just in my opinion, just ugly concepts that are really old, of what Tali could have looked like. I'm glad she looks the way she looks. But anyways, if you want to get a real life version of that frame and photo, you can get it from BioWare Gear Store right now, as well as a just interesting shirt that says it was totally worth it, which is a line that Tali says to Shep if they smashed in the second game. She talks about how it made her sick, but it was worth it. Look, I love Mass Effect. I'm a big Tali fan. That along with like the body pillows that you can buy, which if you didn't know, that is a thing. A little too much for me. I'm gonna hard pass on that personally. So, but hey, to each their own. I will say there was kind of an interesting tidbit though in that photo frame, in the description, the item description in the store. If you remember, it was just over a year ago that they had the big item description for the poster that they made from the 2021 in 7-day teaser that seemingly to some of us felt like it may have been a bit of a bit of a maybe a leak, or maybe a very detailed teaser, or maybe just an intern's made up story. And this one, it's a letter from Tali to Shepard, and at the end it insinuates that they have many more adventures left together. I decided to make kind of a joking clickbait video suggesting that maybe that was another way for them to suggest that Shepard's back for the next game. I acknowledge that that's mostly just hopium on my part, but yep, if you want some more Tali merch from Mass Effect, go ahead and check out the BioWare Gear Store. I am a BioWare Gear Store ambassador, so I can make a 20% off code anytime I want. So if you ever want a discount on items in that store, please let me know. And I can if I have one already, I can give it to you. If I don't, I can make one in about 30 seconds. So just let me know, and I will get a little cut of that, and you will get 20% off. Story number 7, the Diablo 4 server slam test, final thoughts. It was really good. I was really impressed. The first couple tests they did for Diablo, I had a lot of issues with getting queued up and getting in the servers, and I had very minimal issues actually in the game once I got in. This server slam, I saw some people think that maybe it's the numbers weren't as big because Tears of the Kingdom came out the same day, and that's definitely possible. That they maybe didn't get slammed as much as they thought. I suspect they did, though. I think that they probably have just done some really good work over the last few months and getting their servers and their whole network just ready for what's about to happen here in a few weeks when this game actually comes out. So I believe it's June 6th that we're getting Diablo 4. I'm really excited. I haven't gotten into a Diablo game in many years, so I'm really excited to see what they're going to do here with this one. And I've really enjoyed what I've played so far, but I definitely have had to be careful to not burn myself out, because at this point I've played the first like 5 to 10 hours of Diablo 4 3 times, and so I'll be very excited to blow through that as quickly as possible and to get into parts of the game I haven't seen yet that were blocked off in the betas. So I'm really excited for Diablo. I'm definitely going to be streaming it. I'll be talking about it on the podcast. I'll be making some videos about it, I'm sure. I'm not really one to make like, this is the best build in Diablo, but I'll definitely do, just some general thoughts videos, and maybe if there's anything cool I stumble upon. The final story here is a real quick one. Story number 8. The Epic showed off their Unreal Engine Deformer tech. It is theoretically tech that's going to allow them to simulate things all the way down to the bones, to the muscles, to the skin, and even clothing, to just make everything move more naturally, and even to the point where like you should be able to more better see the way the body reacts to clothing underneath the clothing and stuff. What's really interesting about it, though, is that it's very likely that the tech will still incorporate, like data saving and streaming, memory streaming savings. Basically, if say there's like the body of a character and then there's clothes on top of that, you don't want the pixels of the body to be rendered, because that's just wasted rendering space because no one can see it. But I think what this tech is supposed to be doing is still having the outer layer, the clothing, behave as if there's stuff underneath it, even though it may not be rendering. And so I think from what I could gather, that was like kind of the exciting part about this tech. And that would be great if we can see, this is the kind of stuff that may be used more in like in-game cutscenes and stuff. Maybe, I don't know if we'll see this kind of tech used in like live gameplay, but I could see in like in-game cinematics that are able to more fully, focus on using the power on just the visuals, that maybe we'll see some of that tech show up sooner and later, or not. I don't know, man. Unreal Engine 5 in some ways appears to be like a magic engine with all the stuff it can do, but we kind of need to see some games come out to like really show it off, because even a game as recent as like Jedi Survivor is still an Unreal Engine 4 game. So I think we're still yet to see all of this miracle work being done by Unreal Engine 5. Okay, let's move to listener questions. If you have your own questions, be sure to ask in the Discord, in the YouTube comments. You can ask live during the recording here on Twitch if you want to, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Bondiesel or at the EchoCast. The first kind of topic here is from YouTube's. They posted it and said, I'd like you to have a Mass Effect speculation chat. Could look at how contemporaries, be it other games or media, even what's going on in real life, could influence the next game. Maybe even organize it by core pillars like story, exploration, combat, customization. He mentions that in an interview with another podcast. Mac Walters, who was a writer on the trilogy, mentioned in a recent interview that even just in the writing aspect, current events influence like Mass Effect 3 quite a bit. On the gameplay side, Mark Dara had mentioned how including mounts in Dragon Age Inquisition was seen as very, very important because other games that were in their genre were doing that, and just kind of asking what could be the essential trendy features to be in the next Mass Effect game would be. So yeah, so like story, I think one thing I think that people haven't talked much about, and I even mentioned it back when the war started, and people like kind of disagreed with me. It was really interesting. I think the Ukraine war is going to be extremely influential on video games moving forward, in a few ways. The politics of it and kind of the invasion of one country trying to be colonial still, and trying to bring back, and Mass Effect could definitely play off of this idea a bit, but trying to bring land back into their fold, and that land doesn't want to be brought back, and then a war happens. Just the pure combat footage. I haven't talked much about it, but I want to, about how you have to realize that like all these games use like reference material, right? Even the game like The Division would have used reference material from actual like war, but all of that footage that they would have used to do that would have been like kind of crappy like Iraq or Afghanistan combat footage, which is like insurgencies are different than like full scale war. And I really think people underestimate how, daily on Reddit, if you look in the right spots, you can see even hourly new footage from the front lines of the Ukraine war, whether it's drone footage or GoPro footage from a soldier's helmet. You can like see footage of young men running into trenches and like shooting other people and throwing grenades into bunkers and then clearing them out and getting hurt and evacuated, and like we're seeing war in 4K, and it's crazy. And I really think that both from a story perspective and what's going on in Ukraine, to a combat and gameplay perspective, I think that war and the footage that we're seeing of it, for better or worse, is going to heavily influence games moving forward. Any games that involve any kind of like war, obviously like Call of Duty and stuff, like that they're going to be, eventually we're going to see games that are heavily influenced by it. But I think even a game like the next Mass Effect could take, especially the story, but even some of the kind of combat stuff from it, because we're seeing, two first world nations with modern armies kind of fight, and it's not just like hit and run attacks like we saw in insurgencies and stuff. Like this is like straight up, there's a front line that's moving war, there's territory being taken, there's people losing their lives, lots of them. It's interesting. I think that's going to be a huge influence, the Ukraine war. When it comes to exploration, I think that's going to be a really interesting one, because I think that we see, Andromeda was obviously following the trend of these big open world games that were very popular in the 2010s, popularized especially by Ubisoft, but even by like Breath of the Wild from Nintendo late in the years. And that didn't work out great. You see a lot of people, and I think even a lot of people who like Andromeda aren't like thrilled by the way it's set up. So I would really expect the exploration side of things to be different. I still think that I think instead of having a handful of really, really big worlds to explore, I think it's likely that we'll see something maybe even kind of like Mass Effect 1, or maybe we'll see, many more smaller areas to explore. And I hope they're not quite as cut and paste as Mass Effect 1 was, but I suspect we're past that, I hope. And I actually would be surprised if the next game continues to follow this trend of like completely open world, and no linearity at all. I actually would be expecting and pleased if the next Mass Effect is just a little more linear. Give us some opportunities to do what we want, but maybe put us down a path a little bit more than what we saw in something like Andromeda. And then in customization, I mean, I think we look back at Andromeda again, and we'll maybe kind of see what BioWare is willing to do with Dragon Age Dreadwolf. But I really think that it would be hard to put that cat back in the bag. I actually, one of the things I really like about Andromeda is how customizable a lot of the stuff is, whether it's your gear, your character, your ships, your weapons, even the Nomad. You can customize quite a bit, both gameplay wise and visually. So I would expect that to be pretty big. And if I had to pick like one thing that I think they'll definitely have because it's popular right now, I mean, you would want to look at probably Tears of the Kingdom is probably the next like big is probably the next big influential game. I don't see too much of what Tears does though as something that could like be directly put into Mass Effect. But I think just the general idea of having some freedom and the ability to have creativity to solve puzzles and to have like creative gameplay. Maybe we'll see that. Maybe that will be the big thing that they feel forced to do. They're so early in development. I'm sure all those devs are playing Tears right now, and they're all getting inspired by it. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we don't see the little puzzles from Andromeda. I forget what they're called off the top of my head, but it's maybe we won't do that again. Maybe we'll see some more creative puzzle stuff, hopefully. But that's a really great topic, and maybe I can do a whole separate video about that one day, and go in a little bit more depth. In the live chat here, Sudoku, that's what I was thinking of from Andromeda. I never quite figured it out. I mean, I kind of did, and I just don't like it. And then we have some questions here from Master Prime. We have your fan casting for Mass Effect TV series. I actually already wrote that down as a video to do, so I'm not going to answer that right now because I would have a hard time doing it. But I wanted to mention it because that is now on my list of videos to do. And yes, I want Henry Cavill to be in there, but maybe not as who you think. Another question from Master Prime is, do you have faith in this year's Summer Game Fest? I believe that was the question. I think it's going to be weaker than Jeff probably wants it to be, with PlayStation and PlayStation and Xbox doing their own shows. Obviously there's third parties that he's going to be able to pull in, like Kojima, but you can't underestimate PlayStation and Xbox's ability to pull in third parties too. And so I'm really curious to how his show will complement those. I'm really curious to how PlayStation going first will impact what they show, because they'll probably be more willing to show stuff at his show, because why not? It's not going to hurt anything. They've already shown what they want. They control the narrative. Where on the other hand, Xbox being after Summer Game Fest, they won't be able to show as much stuff on his show. And so I think we'll notice that juxtaposition. But yeah, I think he'll show some cool stuff. I also think it's going to be 50% commercials and him self-flagellating, but that's how he rolls. And then urban or rural setting in games. I'm definitely mixed on that. I like both. There's a game that is going to have a more rural setting, or at least more a suburban setting, that's coming out sooner than later. And I will be very excited to talk about that, but I can appreciate both. There's definitely games like State of Decay 2 is a good one that never quite got like a city map. All their maps are like country maps that have like little towns in them. So I definitely find that I would appreciate if we got more urban stuff, but you also see that there's tech limitations to that. There's a reason why a lot of games take place in the less densely populated places. So we'll see. Okay, and if we have any Twitch questions, we do have one live one here from Cage Nephilim saying SAG and AFTRA have voted to strike if negotiations fall through. What kind of effect do you think a prolonged strike will have on the gaming industry? That would put me in kind of a place that I don't know enough. I would need to do some research to see. I assume that would have a lot more impact. Like the Writers Guild, I assume is mostly like traditional media, but I believe that SAG would impact games a lot more because I know we've heard conversations about like Jennifer Hale and stuff like that. Being unionized and part of these guilds, it does directly impact their what they get paid and stuff like that for their voice acting and nowadays what's really interesting, especially with that kind of stuff, is a lot of voice actors are expected to not just be voice actors anymore, and that you see like especially in like the Naughty Dogs and stuff like that, their voice actors are also the actors in the games and are very often the main subjects of the facial capture and even the body capture in this and like the cutscenes and stuff. That it's at one point I imagine being a voice actor for video games was a lot like being a voice actor for a cartoon, and you weren't very physically involved. And I'm sure that still happens. And with tech that we've seen in Unreal Engine 5 and stuff like that, maybe that isn't as important as it used to be. And heaven forbid all these companies are trying to do all this AI crap now and replace these people who have the skills. But I really believe that, I think that maybe as gamers, we've been a little bit teased by the Writers Guild thing not impacting games yet. It's also, I'm under the impression that a lot of time the writing teams are like the first ones out. So I would imagine like short term, even if SAG did strike, we wouldn't see any big impacts in the short term, but in the long term, it may be more apparent, and we may see games that were pretty obviously like written and maybe even voice acted by people who had no business doing it. So we'll see, but that's a really good question, and it's an interesting topic that hopefully will not be relevant soon, but probably will be. So that's it. That's all we have for this week for listener questions. I appreciate those. And I we'll wrap things up. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you have any feedback for the show, please let me know in all the right places. You can catch it all over the place, and I do plan on streaming it live on Twitch on Friday evenings or afternoons. Pay attention to the EchoCast Twitter account to see those announcements. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and Instagram. And that is all I have. So until next time.